Welcome to this Colorado Pika Project volunteer training video. I am Megan Mueller, Senior Conservation Biologist with Rocky Mountain Wild and co-director of the Colorado Pika Project. Thank you so much for your interest in volunteering with the project. In this video, I will introduce you to the American pika, talk about the potential impacts of climate change on pikas, and describe the research that you will contribute to as a Colorado Pika Project volunteer. I'll start by introducing you to pikas. If you spent time in Colorado's high country, chances are good you've either seen or heard an American pika. Pikas are a relative of rabbits and hares. They're about the size of a potato with no visible tail and Mickey Mouse ears. The lack of a visible tail makes them easy to identify in the field. They're typically grayish brown with a buff underside. This is the distribution of the American pika. The species occurs throughout the western U.S. and along the western margin of Canada. They are found at elevations ranging from near sea level to above 14,000 feet. At lower latitudes, in the southern portion of their range, which includes the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, they are usually found above 8,000 feet in elevation. They typically inhabit areas of broken rock. Pikas are interesting because they have unique traits that enable them to survive the extreme winters at high elevation in the mountains. But these traits may make them vulnerable to climate change. Having some background on pika ecology is helpful in understanding why pikas might be vulnerable to climate change. This photo shows typical habitat for American pikas here in Colorado. For about 9 months of the year, it's freezing cold, mostly covered in snow, and with strong winds in exposed areas that can exceed 50 to 100 miles an hour. There is little or no green vegetation. How does the small, warm-blooded herbivore survive winter in this incredibly harsh environment? Pikas don't hibernate, and they don't migrate to lower elevations in winter. Instead, they have several adaptations to survive freezing temperatures. First, they have a very high metabolic rate, which means that their bodies burn large quantities of food to generate energy and heat to keep warm in winter. They also have a thick coat, which helps them retain heat, and they retain heat very well relative to other small mammals. As a result, their resting body temperature is elevated. For example, a human's resting body temperature is around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, while a pika's resting body temperature is typically around 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Unfortunately, some of these traits that enable pika to survive winter make them vulnerable to overheating if they are exposed to high temperatures in summer. In addition to relatively high resting body temperatures, pikas also have relatively low upper lethal body temperatures. It's interesting to contrast pikas with humans. Humans can tolerate an increase in body temperature of around 8 degrees before we overheat and die, while an increase in body temperature of only roughly 2 to 3 degrees is lethal to pikas. Prolonged exposure to temperatures of around 80 degrees Fahrenheit can cause overheating and death in pikas. However, pikas have strategies that allow them to stay cool and live in many locations where temperatures regularly get above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. As a consequence of the need to stay warm in harsh winters at high elevation and avoid overheating in summer, pika are habitat specialists. They are found only in fields or piles of broken rock debris. Pikas will use a variety of different types of patches of broken rock, from lava fields to talus to mine tailings. These fields or piles of broken rock debris have crevices where subsurface temperature differs quite a bit from the temperature at the surface. In Colorado, pikas are typically found in talus. Talus is a field of coarse broken rock debris, often found at the base of a cliff, chute, or slope where falling rocks accumulate. In winter, temperatures under the talus are warmer than the air at the surface, particularly when the talus is covered in snow. Pikas have higher survival rates in talus where snowpack provides insulation from cold throughout the winter. In summer, temperatures under the talus are cooler than temperatures at the surface during the day. Pikas avoid heat stress in summer by frequently resting in the cool microclimate under the talus. You can see the pika in this photo is resting in the shade under an overhanging rock. Pikas living in talus with deep crevices and persistent ice or water underneath may be able to withstand higher surface temperatures. Like rabbits, pikas are generalist herbivores. Their diet can include grasses, flowering plants, also known as forbs, shrubs, evergreen needles, moss, lichens, and other vegetation. Pika are not picky eaters. Pikas have an ingenious adaptation for surviving the winter months without access to fresh food. They spend most of the summer collecting grasses and flowering plants and laying them out to dry in organized piles tucked in under overhanging rocks and in crevices under rocks. These hay piles serve as a winter food cache for each pika, its lifeline to survive 9 months of winter. For this reason, pika hay piles and territories are fiercely defended. Hay piles vary in size and some can be very large. One study in Colorado found that the average hay pile size was roughly 62 pounds of fresh vegetation per pika, which represents around 14,000 foraging trips. Hay piles are generally smaller and harder to find early in summer and larger and easier to find in late summer and fall. Hay piles reflect the vegetation available to a pika around the talus where they live and can be made up of cached grasses, flowering plants, and other types of vegetation like the needles of conifers. Pikas may select plants with higher nitrogen and water content and may be able to handle higher temperatures at sites with high quality vegetation. Hay piles are usually found under the largest rocks in the talus. A pika hay pile consists of vegetation that has been placed in a somewhat organized pile and tucked under rocks. Marmots often live near pikas and also clip vegetation, but it's typically strewn about in the talus rather than organized in a pile. Prime habitat for pikas is usually near the edge of the talus near vegetation where the largest rocks are. It's ideal for pikas to be close to vegetation because they have to make so many trips to collect enough plants for their winter food supply. They prefer the largest rocks in the talus, likely because the parts of the talus with the largest rocks have more shade and deeper crevices. Pikas live in loose colonies. While they like to have neighbors, both males and females are territorial. Yellow circles on this slide show examples of prime territories. Red X's indicate areas of the talus that are less likely to be occupied. Pika territories are usually around about 12 meters in radius. A pika's hay pile is its most important resource for surviving winter, and pikas steal each other's hay. So pikas defend their territories and hay piles by marking rocks with a scent gland in the cheek, making territorial calls, chasing other pikas off, and if necessary, having boxing matches like you see in this series of photos of two adult males. Pikas have two types of calls, short calls and long calls. The short calls are used as alarm calls and for territorial defense. They sound a bit like a squeaky bath toy. Here is an example of an adult pika making a short call. Note that you'll hear some birds in the background. Here is an example of a juvenile pika making a short call. Pikas also make long calls, which are used to advertise availability for mating, mainly by males, and perhaps also for other purposes. Here is an example of an adult pika making a long call. Pikas have different dialects and sound noticeably different in different mountain ranges. Pikas mate opportunistically, often with neighbors. They aren't monogamous and don't mate for life. Pikas breed in April, May, and June. Females can have up to 3 litters per year in a good year. The average litter size is 3. By the time you can see juvenile pikas above the talus, they are roughly the size of a golf ball and adorable. A pika's first year of life is very difficult. Juveniles have to grow to a mature size, travel to find their own territory, and collect enough hay to survive the winter, all during the very short alpine summer. Juvenile survival is generally very low. On average, pikas live 2 to 3 years, but adults with good territories can live much longer than that. One adult pika tagged and tracked as part of a study lived for 9 years. The most common pika predators include raptors and several members of the weasel family. Weasels, like this short-tailed weasel on the right, are the most effective predators because they can pursue pikas down into the talus. There are a variety of other species that likely prey on pika occasionally. This is a yellow-bellied marmot hanging out with a pika. Marmots and pikas are often found in the same type of habitat. In fact, pika hay piles are often right near marmot dens. Marmots and pikas share a similar set of predators, so they might benefit from each other's alarm calls, and pikas may also benefit from adult marmots running weasels off. Female pikas sometimes put their nurseries in marmot dens, and this has been shown to result in increased juvenile survival. Pikas are often also found collecting marmot scat and placing it in their hay piles. We don't know why, it's a mystery, but perhaps it prevents marmots from stealing from hay piles, or maybe it helps to preserve hay piles. You can tell marmot calls apart from pika calls because they're higher pitched chirps or whistles that sound like this. In summary, pika are physiologically sensitive to warm temperatures and live in talus with cool microclimates where they can stay cool in summer. In winter, they need snow cover for insulation from freezing temperatures. Pikas also select habitat next to areas with sufficient vegetation to allow them to store enough food in their hay piles to survive winter. Now that you know some basic pika ecology, let's talk about how Colorado's climate is changing. Colorado's climate has become substantially warmer over the past 30 years, and all climate model projections predict continued warming of temperatures in Colorado. No long-term trends in average annual precipitation or snowpack have been detected across Colorado yet, and there's uncertainty about how precipitation and snowpack may change with climate change. Snowpack is expected to decrease to some extent due to higher temperatures. In addition, the timing of snowmelt has shifted earlier in the spring by 1 to 4 weeks in Colorado over the past 30 years due to warmer spring temperatures and increased dust on snow. Most projections predict further declines in spring snowpack with future warming. These changes in climate could potentially affect pikas in several ways. With increased summer temperatures, pikas may need to spend more time under the talus trying to stay cool, reducing the amount of time they can spend gathering the food that they need to survive the winter. If summer temperatures get high enough, pikas might not be able to stay cool enough to avoid overheating and death. In addition, in winter and spring, a reduced snowpack could make it colder under the talus. As a result, pikas might need to eat more hay to generate enough energy to stay warm and run out of food before summer, or they could simply freeze to death during cold periods. Another potential problem is that young pikas traveling to find a territory might not be able to survive the trip between patches of talus if it gets too hot. Climate change could also change pika habitat in other ways that are complicated to predict. In recent decades, researchers have linked climate change to disappearance of pikas from historically occupied sites in the Great Basin, northeastern California, an area of the Sierra Nevada near Lake Tahoe, not shown here, and Zion National Park and Cedar Breaks National Monument in Utah. This figure shows pika losses from historically occupied sites in red and locations where pikas were still present when the surveys were done in green. Pikas are disappearing from places with warmer summers and from cold places with little snow. While researchers are concerned about how pika will respond to climate change, pikas are predicted to survive in some mountain habitats despite climate change. In addition, pika may survive in sites where local site characteristics mediate the impacts of high summer temperatures. For example, pikas live in the Columbia River Gorge near sea level, where August temperatures are between 80 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Pikas are able to survive in this hot environment because the talus is covered in thick moss that they eat, reducing the time that they need to spend above the surface. The moss also insulates the talus from the heat. Pikas may also be able to acclimate to climate change through changing their behavior. For example, at sites with higher temperatures, pikas have been observed foraging at night. This could reduce the amount of time pikas are exposed to high surface temperatures. Pikas still appear to be widespread and relatively abundant in Colorado. Surveys in the southern Rocky Mountains indicate that there have been very few losses of pikas at historically occupied sites. 2 statewide surveys of sites historically occupied by pikas found only 5 sites where pikas are now absent. In addition, Colorado Pika Project volunteers have surveyed roughly 44 historically occupied sites along the Front Range since 2010 and have not documented any losses of pika populations. This may suggest that pikas could be more resilient to climate change in the extensive high elevation habitat found in Colorado's Rocky Mountains than in areas with more isolated lower elevation habitat where losses of pika populations have been documented. However, researchers are still concerned about how pikas will respond to climate change in Colorado. Recent climate model projections for pika populations in Rocky Mountain National Park, developed based on research done by the National Park Service Pikas in Peril Project, predicts that nearly all of the park's pikas could become locally extinct due to climate change by the year 2100. This figure shows current pika occupancy at the top in blue and green on the map labeled A, and 2 future occupancy scenarios for pika at the bottom on the maps labeled B and C. The two future scenarios are based on two different models of potential human-driven carbon emissions. You can see that by 2099, pika are predicted to be restricted to less than 20% of their current distribution or nearly extirpated from the park. In addition, long-term research on local pika populations on Niwot Ridge in the Front Range is finding fewer juveniles per adult now than in the 1980s, and fewer juveniles per adult in the longer, hotter summers, as you can see in this figure from Chris Ray at the University of Colorado. They also find fewer adult territory owners. So the study population on Niwot Ridge may be declining, and it's possible that other populations of pika in Colorado are also declining, even though research in Colorado hasn't yet documented losses of pika populations. Researchers are also very concerned that pikas may be susceptible to rabbit hemorrhagic disease, which affects rabbits and has been recently confirmed in Colorado. This is a highly contagious and fatal disease not typically found in the United States that affects domestic and wild rabbits and hares. Pikas are presumed to be susceptible to the virus because they are related to rabbits and hares, though infections have not been previously documented in pikas in the US or elsewhere. If pikas are susceptible to this virus, the disease could have significant impacts on pika populations. Colorado Pika Project surveys could help to detect the virus, but also carry a potential risk of introducing the virus into pika populations. People can spread the virus by carrying it on clothing, shoes, and equipment. For this reason, we require volunteers doing surveys to carefully follow procedures to avoid introducing the virus to pika populations. In addition, if you have domestic rabbits, you will need to take extra precautions to avoid infecting your rabbits. We will teach you these procedures at the field training. Because of pika's sensitivity to climate variation, pika are an indicator species for climate change. Studying pikas can help us observe and understand how ecosystems are changing. For example, other species like Canada lynx and wolverines rely on snowpack to insulate their dens in spring when their young are born. Studying how pikas respond to changing snowpack could give us hints about how climate change may impact these species. More data is needed in order to help guide wildlife management policies in Colorado and elsewhere, and field data in particular plays a vital role in evaluating the impact of climate model predictions firsthand. Unfortunately, researchers and managers don't have the funds or capacity to carry out such extensive and often difficult to access on-the-ground work. This is where community science comes in. Colorado Pika Project is currently seeking volunteers to contribute to two research initiatives. The Rocky Mountain National Park Initiative is closely aligned with the National Park Service's Pikas in Peril Research Project. The Pikas in Peril Project launched in 2010 with the goal of learning more about how climate change will impact pika populations across 8 national parks in the lower 48 states. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, that research predicted that we may see dramatic declines in suitable habitat for pika in Rocky Mountain National Park over the next century. Colorado Pika Project is collaborating with the park and researchers at the University of Colorado to monitor pikas and build improved predictions for how pikas will respond to climate change in the park. The White River National Forest has selected pikas as a species to monitor because studying pikas gives land managers a deeper understanding of the health and integrity of the alpine ecosystem that pikas depend on. Colorado Pika Project's research in the White River National Forest aims to determine the status of local pika populations, evaluate potential changes to these populations over time, and collect data needed to begin to develop climate model projections for pika populations across the forest. This project is modeled after the Pikas in Peril Rocky Mountain National Park project. To achieve these goals, we have selected 158 long-term monitoring sites in Rocky Mountain National Park and in the White River National Forest. You can see the study areas here on this map. After the training, volunteers sign up to survey one or more of these sites. At these sites, volunteers do surveys to monitor whether pikas are present or absent at the site by searching for pikas, hay piles, and pika scat. Volunteers also record information on the weather at the time of the survey and on features of the habitat, including information about water, land cover, vegetation, rock depth and size, and observations of other species that are present. In addition, volunteers collect pika scat samples and take photos. You will use the same methods used by professional wildlife biologists with the Pikas in Peril project and the surveys typically take about 45 minutes to an hour to complete. We will demonstrate and practice the survey methods at the field training. We hope you will join us and contribute to a critically important long-term data set on American pikas. The data that you collect will be used by the Forest Service, the National Park Service, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and several researchers to help guide the management and conservation of pikas. I want to close by thanking you for your interest in volunteering. If you've decided to volunteer and have signed up for a field training session, we look forward to meeting you and working with you. This project would not be possible without our amazing volunteers, and we hope you are looking forward to becoming part of our team. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope to see you at a field training session.